really, by definition, must-win games, or games that if you don't win, you don't get to play anymore. Win or you're done. Win or go home, elimination games. Those are truly must-win games. But after yesterday, I think we've all had our fill of that type of must-win game. So let's talk about the figurative must-win game, the poetic must-win game, the game that is of absolute importance if you want to achieve your ultimate goals, even though the fact remains that you're going to have another game to play, whether you win or lose. Because by that definition, the poetic must-win, Pitt's got a must-win game tonight when the Panthers host Syracuse at the Petersen Events Center. Let's get you ready for that game here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, Pitt's got the rematch against Syracuse tonight, a little over 2 weeks after the Panthers faced the Orange at the Dome. That was December 30th. It feels like a really long time ago. It feels like a whole other year, but it's because it was. And at that point, we were trying to figure out what Pitt was going to be and how they were going to do in the ACC, and obviously they ended up with an 8-point loss. And we'll talk about that game a little bit and how it relates to tonight's game. But really, the focus is going to be on the Panthers and the Orange tonight at the Petersen Events Center. 7 o'clock tip-off for that game. It'll be on ESPN2. You can hear it on 93.7 The Fan and all the regular things that you know about. And, of course, you'll get all your coverage, your video coverage at least, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you won't miss our Morning Pitt tomorrow morning recapping the game. You won't miss Jeff Capel's post-game press conference, or hear for Pitt players and Syracuse coach and players and anybody else who comes out and talks in the post-game. We'll have videos of all of that right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll also have our live show tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. We do that every Wednesday night. Me and Jim Hammett get together to talk a little Pitt sports with you, to talk about everything that's going on, and certainly we'll be talking about the Pitt-Syracuse game, among other topics. That happens right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com at 8 p.m. This Saturday, right? This Saturday, Pitt's going to Duke for the return game, the rematch with the Blue Devils, and unfortunately that game's in Durham. It's an 8 o'clock game. And that game is on ACC Network. But when that game ends, we will have a live post-game show, again, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And so, as you can see, we got a lot going on here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you can turn on notifications so you get an alert anytime we go live or anytime we post new content. You won't miss any of it. Of course, all of the coverage is at the mothership. Panther-Lair.com is the website. Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. That's the place to get all of your Pitt sports coverage, whether it's football, basketball, recruiting. We've got a little bit of it up there. A little bit of everything, I should say, on the site. Today, if you go and look, I mean, there's the Morning Pitt video. There's the one yesterday talking about NIL and how that's impacted everything. We've got recruiting articles. We've got basketball recruiting, football recruiting. We've got content previewing tonight's game. Matt Steinbrink always breaks down the matchups. And then we do our staff picks, where all of our records more or less mirror Pitt's. There's not really, hasn't been really too much in the way of surprises or changes or anything like that. Everybody's pretty much on the same path as Pitt right now when it comes to the record. I'm behind, but we're all right around the same level. I don't think any of us picked Pitt to beat. No, Houston picked Pitt to beat Duke. Otherwise, we all had the Blue Devils picking the Orange, or had all had the Blue Devils beating the Panthers. And I'm pretty confident that we're all going to pick Pitt in tonight's game. I was trying to find a line. Pitt, when I'm looking at this, as of last night, Pitt was minus 5.5 with an over-under of 144.5. The Panthers, of course, lost at Syracuse on the next to last day, the penultimate day of 2023. An 8-point loss where they led by 8 at halftime. Pretty disappointing turn there. They led by 8 at halftime. Guillermo Diaz-Graham made a 3, a minute and change into the second half, and gave Pitt an 11-point lead, and they got outscored by 19 from there on out. And there were a lot of reasons why that happened. There were, we talked about that game. It wasn't that long ago. We did a post-game show. It was our first basketball post-game show of the season, and that was I think we all covered a lot of ground on why that loss happened, and I don't think anybody has forgotten why that loss happened. Although in the time since then, Pitt has, they've struggled. They've slumped. They lost to Syracuse. They lost to North Carolina by 13, a game that they had some opportunities to take control of, but they weren't able to do so. They bounced back with a win at Louisville the following Saturday, and then got, just blown out by Duke last Tuesday. They get the weekend off, and now they're back at it here a week later with a chance to try to bounce back against Syracuse. Pitt is 1-4 in the ACC right now, and Syracuse is 2-3. So you have two teams that are right around the same area. Syracuse in the net rankings is 80. Pitt is 67. So Pitt's a little bit better there. Syracuse being 80, makes this a quad 3 game for Pitt, given that it's at home. But quadrants and things like that notwithstanding, this is a must-win game. And it's, you can actually throw in the quad 3 factor, the reality, as we've pointed out a number of times. So, up until this point this season, Pitt is 10-1 against quad 3 and quad 4 games. I think the loss to Missouri is the only quad 3 loss that they've got. They're 6-0 in quad 4 games. So they've taken care of business. I've talked about this a bunch of times, about they've taken care of business against the lower end of the schedule. They've taken care of business in the quad 3 games and the quad 4 games. Now, it's, I guess it's not a good thing that out of their remaining games, how many do they have left? Like 15 games. Out of those remaining 15 games, only 3 are quad 3 or quad 4 games. There's the Syracuse game tonight. They host Notre Dame in a couple weeks. And then the next to last game of the season, they have Florida State at home. Everything else is quad 1 or quad 2. With the Duke and Miami games on the road, and NC State and Virginia on the road, Wake Forest on the road, and Clemson on the road, all being quad 1 games. Georgia Tech on the road, Wake Forest at home, Virginia Tech at home, Boston College on the road, and NC State at home is quad 2. So you have almost sort of an even balance there of 6 quad 1 games and 5 quad 2 games in the remaining schedule. Number one thing is you have to avoid getting those low-end losses. At some point, you're going to have to start winning some of those games in the quad 1 and quad 2 ranks. But as you can see, the vast majority of their remaining games are in that area. So if they fail to win any of those games, that they struggle in those games, or only get 1 or 2 wins, then it's ultimately not going to matter. They're not going to be in the NCAA tournament conversation. Anyway, they're going to have to start piling up some wins there. But it would be a good start just to get back on the winning track by beating Syracuse. And I think it's very much a doable task. Syracuse is, 1 win better than Pitt overall and in the conference. And that one, they're 1 win better in the conference. That gives them a 1 win better record overall. But they're not much better. As we say, Pitt is higher in the net rankings. And I think when you look at that game that was played in Syracuse a couple weeks ago, it was, it wasn't just close. It was a game Pitt should have won. And some of the big things we talked about after that game, still resonate as ways that Pitt let it slip away. Going 11 of 24 from the free throw line. That's a big one. And that's one you circle. And I've always been one that I hesitate to jump on free throws. Okay, but there are other reasons they lost that game. This game, this Syracuse game, was absolutely lost with free throws. 11 of 24 from the free throw line. 3 of those were the front end of the 1-and-1. So you could actually make the case that they left 16 points at the free throw line in a game that they ultimately lost by 8. You don't have to be great. They didn't need to shoot 100%, but they had to make just a few more of those free throws, and they're in the game and potentially winning the game. And then Blake Hinson's disappearing act in that game. 11 points he scored, 3 of 12 from the floor, 1 of 7 from 3. He was completely shut out in the second half, 0 of 7 from the floor. I think 5 of those 7 shots were 3-pointers. That was really I don't want to say it was the start of the stretch where Blake Hinson started to struggle, because I think his shooting woes showed up a little bit at the end of the non-conference schedule, but that was the game where it really was hammered home of like, wow, this is a problem. This is a problem, and it'll continue to be a problem if they can't get him going. And I mean, I think in the 3 games since then, he's been kind of going in one. Yeah, I don't think they fully rounded that curve just yet. I don't think they've gotten out of I don't think they've gotten away from that problem just yet. I think Blake Hinson's going to have to continue building back to the level that Pitt needs him to be at. And along with that, you're going to need the continued evolution of the players that we've talked about a lot. The Bub Carrington, the Jalen Lowe, Ishmael Leggett. His status. I actually meant to check. Jeff Capel talked about it on the ACC coaches teleconference yesterday. Capel said that Leggett is close to getting back to 100%. He had no contact until yesterday, meaning Sunday. Then Sunday was full go with contact, and the biggest thing right now is just getting back into game shape, but he's good to go. So Leggett should be a full participant tonight. Whether he goes back into the starting lineup or whether Jalen Lowe stays there remains to be seen. I've always been the type that I don't get too caught up in who starts. Like, show me the minutes at the end of the game. The minutes at the end of the game are what is really going to tell the story about who was given the most opportunity to impact the game, or maybe reflective of who was impacting the game the most, because Jeff Capel very much goes with the hot hand to the point where sometimes I think he's sticking with certain guys for too long. Not because they're not playing well, but just because you got to give them a rest sometimes. I mean, we've seen, 8-9 minute stretches to close the game with no subs, and he's not the first coach in history to do that. And you do have to stick with your guys who are going to, give you the best chance to win the game. But at the same time, I do think he runs the risk of wearing his guys down. But regardless, that's a separate topic, a separate conversation. I don't care who starts. Like I say, show me the minutes at the end of the game. So if Leggett moves back into the starting lineup, but he's out 2 minutes in, or he goes out at the under 16 timeout and Lowe plays the next 10 minutes, well, who had more of an impact and more of an opportunity to make an impact in the first half? And so that's what I'm going to be looking at is how they sub, how frequently they sub. I think the North Carolina game, they'd gone with the 3 guards, to close out the game. And, didn't really see that, or I forget which game it was. They went with the 3 guards to close out the game. And then haven't really done it since. So they've gone with 3 guard lineups, but only sparingly over the course of the season, maybe 2 or 3 games total where they've used it for any amount of time. It just largely because, as we've talked about it, I just don't think the depth is there. They just, because at some point somebody's going to have to sit. You need to be able to rotate those 3 guys and move them around. I think Lowe and Carrington are really your 2 point guards. You're not really going to have Leggett bringing the ball up and kind of orchestrating things in that fashion. So you can play Carrington and Leggett. You can play Lowe and Carrington. You can play Lowe and Leggett. And it's just a mix and a match there. Carrington being the one guy who can kind of play all 3 spots and probably would. I mean, Lowe probably could play the 2 as well, although he's never really called on that. When he's on the court, he's the point guard. So you need those 2 guys to continue growing and evolving. You need Leggett to get healthy, and you need Hinson to be Blake Hinson. Yeah, I mean, it's really that. And I know, we all came out of that Duke game talking about the big advantage Duke had with Kyle Filipowski and how much better he was than Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham. But, I mean, we knew that going into the game. That wasn't a revelation from last Tuesday night. We knew that going into the game. We knew that going into the season that Pitt's interior scoring presence was not going to be great. That the bulk of the points that center position provided was going to come from Guillermo Diaz-Graham hitting threes, which has been the case. There was that stat I came up with last week that Guillermo Diaz-Graham has scored 108 points on field goals this season, and 52 of those 108 have come from the 3-point line. He's making baskets back there, and he's getting his points back there. Almost half of his points have come from behind the three-point line. But what Pitt can do in the paint and what they can do around the rim and how they can attack the basket is with guys like that. With Bub Carrington, with Jalen Lowe, with Ishmael Leggett. I'm not going to even go so far as to say Blake Hinson, because I'm not sure. I think the drives that Hinson was sort of getting away with in the non-conference, I mean, he's not getting away with them in the ACC, and he's probably not going to get away with them in the ACC. But Carrington needs to be more aggressive. Lowe needs to continue to be aggressive. I think he's shown some really promising signs. And Leggett needs to get healthy so he can go in with sort of the reckless abandon he had earlier in the season. Those three guys attacking has to become part of Pitt's sort of regular offense and the things they do all the time. And then Zach Austin has to be that sort of chaos player. That guy who you might not really run offense for him, but opportunities appear for a lob or an alley-oop or a chance for him to get an offensive rebound and a putback, or maybe as Carrington or Lowe drive, they find Leggett open in the corner, or they find Austin, open in the corner to shoot a three. I think he's finding his role, and it's not a defined role like what he probably had at High Point. His role is to sort of fill in all the places where his athleticism allows him to do so. And whether that's on defense, being active and disruptive and getting in passing lanes and taking the ball away and leading a breakout or starting a breakout or finishing a breakout, whether it's doing that, whether it's rebounding, whatever he can do, rebounding either defensively and starting a breakout or offensive rebounding to continue a play or get a putback, or knocking down a three when the defense collapses. Again, I don't think you're really running plays to get Zach Austin a three, but he'll have opportunities to get a three if Leggett and Lowe and Carrington are driving to the hoop. And I think, we've seen the last couple of games, we've seen that emerge as a viable weapon for Pitt. Zach Austin as a viable weapon of offense, just not in sort of a structured, we're going to run this play for Zach kind of way. I just don't think that's what his role is. I feel like Nike, keep coming back to the Nike Sibande comparison with Zach Austin, that he's a taller Nike Sibande. And I think Nike Sibande got a lot of his points and his action in chaos, whether it was fast breaks or it was second chance opportunities or a play breaks down or whatever it is. I don't think they ran a lot of plays for Nike Sibande, but he was able to produce a lot kind of, as I say, in chaos. And, if Nike Sibande was the spark last year and the chaos player last year, I think Zach Austin might be evolving into that role this year. I would guess he'll stay in the starting lineup because I think he's played well since he came back from the benching. My guess is tonight's starting lineup will be Lowe, Carrington, Austin, Hinson, Guillermo Diaz-Graham. With Federico, one of the first subs off the bench, Ishmael Leggett coming in probably early, and then, kind of playing it from there and rotating around and seeing who can fit. I'm sure they would like to get a lot of opportunities for William Jeffress on the court tonight, particularly defensively. It's going to come down to how well the other guys are scoring. If Leggett if Lowe, Carrington, and Leggett are getting theirs, and Hinson is getting his, and Austin is just sort of chipping in from time to time, then yeah, Will Jeffress I think can have a role, that defensive role, to kind of because you're getting scoring from your scorers. But it really feels like this is the start of a stretch run here. It's not the stretch run. I think they still have another off week coming up. Let me look at the schedule real quick. So they have, Syracuse tonight, Duke Saturday, Georgia Tech Tuesday, Miami Saturday, Wake Forest Wednesday, Notre Dame Saturday, NC State Wednesday, and then, there's a break there between NC State on February 7th and Virginia on February 13th. So they do have another break, but this is the start of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games before that break. This is the stretch. Let's go for full hyperbole here. This is the stretch that'll make or break Pitt's season. I mean, really. I mean, they go through these 7 games, and these 7 games are, there's a lot of winnable games here. I mean, obviously Syracuse here is a must win. Notre Dame, that game at home. What I say the date is on that February 3rd. That's a must win. You can't afford to lose that. They're 165 in the net rankings. That's a quad 4 game. You get Wake Forest at home the game before that, January 31st. They're 45 in the net rankings. That would be a huge win for Pitt to pull in. Obviously, if you can go to Georgia Tech and win on the road, that'd be a quad 2 game, a quad 2 win. Miami on the road would be a quad 1 win, and NC State on the road would be a quad 1 win. So out of these 7 games, you got a lot of 1s and 2s here. You got a lot of quad 1 and quad 2 games and a lot of opportunities. And I think this is where Pitt's going to have to make their move. If they can go through these 7 games, let's say, so we won't assume they beat Duke, all right? We will assume that they win the 3 home games. So that'd be Syracuse, Wake Forest, Notre Dame. Okay, so that would be 3-1. And then you're looking at Georgia Tech, Miami, and NC State all on the road. If they could win 2 out of those 3 and go 5-2 in this stretch to improve their record to, what would they be then? They would be 6-6 at that point. Heading into the remainder of the schedule in February, 6-6 in the ACC. That would be huge. But I'm not sure. I think 4-3, and so you end up being, what would they be at that point? 5-7 in the ACC with, not. You don't have another Duke on the schedule, but you do have Clemson on the road. Virginia on the road, where Virginia's been really good at home this year. It just seems to me like I think you have to shoot for and hope for 5-2 in this stretch of 7 games. That's a tall task for a team that has shown itself to have a lot of weaknesses and vulnerabilities. But I think that's what you have to hope for if you're Pitt. And it's what you have to aim for. And if you can pull it off, you're going to I think you'll still have yourself in strong contention for an NCAA tournament spot. But the further you fall below 5-2 over these 7 games, the further and further away from that you're going to get. And that is the ultimate goal, is getting back to the NCAA tournament. That's the big goal here. And that, this stretch of 7 games is going to loom large in whether or not you accomplish that goal or whether or not you have an opportunity to accomplish that goal. It starts tonight with a game that is absolutely a must win. You can't blow this game, because every game in this stretch that you blow, if you blow this game or you blow Notre Dame at home or even Wake Forest at home or Georgia Tech on the road, now you're forcing yourself to have to beat Duke, forcing yourself to have to beat Miami, forcing yourself to have to then win at Virginia later. You don't want to be in that position. You want those wins to be gravy, which means you got to take care of business in the must win. So we'll see what happens tonight. Of course, we'll have a Morning Pitt tomorrow morning breaking down the game and everything we thought about it. Hopefully you'll be at the Petersen Events Center. They called this one a sellout last year when Pitt played Syracuse at the Petersen Events Center. There was a lot of orange in the crowd, so we'll see how much blue there is that shows up tonight. But if you go to the game, enjoy it. If not, enjoy watching it at home. And either way, we'll be here on the Morning Pitt tomorrow morning talking about the game. And, of course, there will be a lot of conversation on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. So like and subscribe right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then head over to the website Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We appreciate it. I hope your week got off to a great start yesterday. And we will catch up with you tomorrow for a full game recap on the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.